Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Faculty Corner, which is one of many events that we do, and I see a lot of familiar faces, some new faces today. So this is something that Maggie and I, who are fairly new to the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, have been doing. We put together an event every single week, either on Thursday or Friday morning, on career and professional development. And in that series, once a month we invite a faculty member from either the medical school or folks in LSNA who are doing biology or biomedical sciences, and we interview them on many aspects of being a faculty member and how did they get to where they are and what are their stories. And if you didn't get a chance, we have confirmed our summer and spring series of Faculty Corner, and it's going to be focused on applying for a faculty position and what the search committee looks for, what the department chairs look for, and how do they decide like where, in which area to hire, like where does the money come from, and how are those decisions made. So you'll get some nice stories from a lot of our senior faculty members. So if you're interested in that, even if you're not applying for a faculty position this fall, it's just kind of good to come and hear that. We also have our entire schedule for other events released, and there's a handout for that. And the most exciting thing that I want to share that you may have already gotten emails is our website is here. And Catherine Garber, who's sitting there, is the heart, blood, and soul behind our website. And we are having a party today at 3 to 5 to launch our website. And the main goal, of course, is to come celebrate our website, but also if you want to come give some feedback after browsing through it as to what you want to see more or less of, that will be great. And there'll be cookies and coffees and such. And in the website, if you just want to quickly bookmark my team's page, which is ogpsmed.umish. If you go under resources, you'll see career professional development, and there's a lot of good information there, and it's kind of a work in progress, so it'll keep getting updated as time goes. And finally, and most importantly, we have our events calendar up to date, so you don't have to rely on that email that we send you periodically, and if you delete the email, you have no idea where to go. So it will be on the website, so make sure that you bookmark the website. So again, I'm going to keep this here. So that being said, I'm very, very excited to invite J.K. Nandakumar, who is an assistant professor in molecular cell and developmental biology. And the reason I invited him was, A, he's a very successful faculty member that he got recommended by students and faculty to be one of our guest speakers, but also I wanted to touch upon his kind of unique experiences in being somebody who grew up in a different country and came here for grad school. And I can relate to that story because that's what I did 19 years ago. So we'll hear from JK on how that was like, coming to a new country, being a graduate student, and also from what I understand, you were a chemist and you became a biologist, so there'll be questions on that. So Ali Bauza, who is a graduate student, a rock star, award-winning graduate student from Laurie Isom's lab, is our student moderator. So if any of you want to be Ali for a future event, make sure you let Maggie or me know, so we'll invite you to be a moderator. So it kind of really helps you in your public speaking skills. So feel free to let us know when and how you want to do that. So it's going to be Ali and JK's show, so I'm going to sit here. There will be opportunities for the audience to ask questions about half an hour into the event, and Ali will prompt you when that's going to be. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, so to start off, could you just tell us briefly about your overall career path and how you got here?
Sure. So from the time I was born, or just
whenever you want to start, fine.
So I can start from the time I was born, although I wasn't studying much at that time. So I was born in a small town, maybe Shobha can pronounce it, called Kodungalur in Kerala, which is in the south.
No way! Manoj is from Kodungalur.
Oh, okay. So that's where I was born.
That's like one of the smallest, like one of the other.
Yeah, it's a small town in Kerala, which is in the southern tip of India. But my parents actually worked in the east in Calcutta, so that's where I grew up. I went to school there, I went to college there, so Presidency College, Calcutta. And then I moved to Bangalore, which is back in the south now, where I did my master's. And so my bachelor's and my master's were in chemistry. And that is when I decided to kind of make a switch. And so I worked as a tech in a biochemistry lab, again in another institute in Bangalore. And then I applied, gave my GREs and then did my PhD in Cornell. So this is where I'm kind of making a switch. So I went from chemistry to chemical biology. And so I was in the tri-institutional program between Rockefeller, Cornell, and Sloan Kettering. From there, I went to Colorado to do a postdoc in Tom Check's lab. This is more an RNA biochemistry lab, but I worked on telomeres and telomerase, which we still continue to work on. And then from there, after a 6-year postdoc, I came here and started in 2013 as an assistant professor.
So when you were deciding to make those switches from chemistry to biology and then moving to the US, what were some of your more pressing considerations during that time?
I think both of those switches were interrelated. So I did not ever think I would, in school I never thought I would even be doing chemistry, right? But then in high school I really had a tutor, not really a teacher, because again, it shouldn't be on camera, but I failed in one of my lab chemistry courses. And till that point, my parents never pushed me into anything. But when my mom saw that on the report card, she was like, no, you can't fail, you have to at least pass, right? And so then I talked with my friends, I got a tutor, and this person really changed my perspective about studying, right? Studying was always a burden, and I started loving chemistry, especially organic chemistry. And so for me, it was obvious. After high school, I just want to do organic chemistry, right? And so in India, you can just, the way it works, it's not so interdisciplinary, your undergraduate degree, so it's just a degree in chemistry, right? And I really enjoyed it. And once you get good at organic chemistry, I don't know, I felt that I had the confidence to conquer all the other chemistry, right? So I just liked chemistry overall. And then, what do you do after a bachelor's degree? Well, do a master's degree, right? And so what I got into is this program in India, which was unique in that it had a master's and PhD tied together. And generally that's not the case. So it's similar to the US, but in India generally you have a master's and then you can elect to do a PhD, right? But you have to be a master's first. So this was a great program. I thought, in 5-6 years I'll get my PhD and I can do it in India. I don't have to go anywhere. And so I got into the chemistry, this integrated PhD is what they called it, in Bangalore, and again in chemistry, right? But that's where I realized that although, so I even joined a lab for my PhD. So I was supposed to do my PhD there. But that's when I realized that I still to the day love organic chemistry on paper, but I didn't like working with solvents in the lab. Okay, and so it was as simple as that. And so I went to my supervisor and I told him, in fact, it wasn't that I was bad at it. I still published papers in my master's, but my health was affected. It was that bad, right? And so I told him, I'm not enjoying this. I maybe want to still do chemistry, but in a slightly different context, maybe, in an aqueous environment, biochemistry, right? And so that's where I think I was kind of shocked, because what happened is my department said, no, you are admitted into chemistry. You can pick another lab in chemistry, but you cannot switch departments. Okay, although there were many prominent biochemists in the the biophysics department, for example, right? And I thought that was, I did not expect that, because I was in very good standing as a student, but this lack of flexibility, right? And so that's when I, heard more about, students coming to the US and everything. And so I decided to then, just quit with a master's. And then I joined a biology lab as a technician. They call it junior research fellow for a year, gave my GREs. And I think, again, this is what attracted me to the US, because I applied to the chemistry program of Cornell, and they had their full class. I got in, and then they had just started a chemical biology program, which means, like I said, Cornell Ithaca, main campus, Cornell Medical School, New York, Rockefeller, New York, Sloan Kettering, New York, together were going to recruit a subset of students from the big chemistry class who are chemists but are interested in biology, right? So they saw my statement of purpose and asked me, do you want to join this? And I said, this is my dream, right? And so they were, even though they had never seen me, they meaning, the people in Cornell, ready to invest in me, okay, this is a chemist, but he can pick up on biology. And that's where I realized, I should be going there for my PhD, because I didn't have that flexibility in me. So that the two are connected. I was not planning to come to the US, but it just happened that way.
Okay. So are there any challenges that you felt like you faced as an international scientist coming here? And could you describe any of those challenges?
So I don't know. So maybe, I can think of at least 3 aspects, right? I mean, one is the culture shock everyone talks about, right? Mm-hmm. So that I didn't experience much, because I came from Bangalore to New York, right? I'm not saying that the two are the same, but it's a big city in India to a big city in the US, very cosmopolitan. I think, I wouldn't say I completely blended with everyone in the US as soon as I came, because I never have watched a single football game, right? The first Super Bowl, I was like, Super Bowl, I was lost, what is this? This is not football. But I think the beauty was, the reason I did not feel out of place is because I never felt compelled to participate in something that others are, right? I was not like my friends would say, oh really, you don't know football, right? It was like, yeah, we're going to watch this game, do you want to come with us? And so I think I had enough time to actually integrate culturally. So that, I mean, for me it took many years, but that's just my personality. But at the same time, I never felt compelled that, you know, my social life or my work life would actually depend on me blending with everyone else. At least in New York, that was my experience, and that's where I entered, right? And so that's the culture. So I didn't have much of a culture shock for that reason. In terms of work culture, I mean, absolutely no issues, because this is the work culture I wanted, right? I mean, people are so professional. Almost everybody is very serious about their work, and that's why I came, you know, so far from my home to do my PhDs. The only thing I would say that was hard to adjust, again, this was a good adjustment, right? But it was still hard to adjust, I think, in the classroom and in the lab. In the classroom, it is in India, the way the instruction goes is your teacher tells you something, and that is the final word, right? You don't question your teacher back for the most purpose. I don't know, maybe things are changing now, right? So it's a very one-way instruction, where if someone tells you something or you read something in the textbook, you don't try to critically analyze that, right? And here, the very first graduate courses I took were, well, they give you papers and you poke a hole. And I'm like, this is in nature, I mean, right? How am I going to poke a hole in a paper? So that was very difficult in the classroom. In the lab also, the relationship with your PI, I would never call my PI, I would be fired. I would have been fired in India if I called him by his first name, right? He's going to be Professor Mehta or Dr. Mehta or something, right? Whereas here, even though there is obviously a hierarchy between your PI and you know, PI probably will make the shots, right? The final call at many things. But the relationship was much more cordial, I think, and even. And so that took me some time to get used to, as to, you know, if my PI tells me an experiment and it does sound that he hasn't put enough thinking, I could tell him that, right, freely, without thinking that I'm going to offend him or disrespect him or something like that. So I think that was the major adjustment for me. But otherwise, I mean, it was very, I mean, in terms of work culture, it was a very smooth transition.
Awesome. How about any challenges after your training years in those aspects as a faculty member once you came here?
So from an international perspective,
Yeah.
I already spent 11 years in the US before I became a faculty member. So I think by the time I became a faculty member, I mean, I was fully integrated, and at no point did I think, so because it's different if your PhD is not from the US. Again, I don't know what the reason for that is, okay? But if you do your PhD and your postdoc in the US as an international person, I mean, it's a pretty level playing field. And so I never felt any extra challenges just from the perspective of being an immigrant.
Right. Cool. And then when you were doing your training, at what point did you know that an academic tenure track position was what you were looking for?
Okay. So that is the perception that I got from my PIs. My thesis, so I had two supervisors, my two PIs, 50-50, one was a biochemist, the other was a crystallographer. And just interacting with them, their attitude was, well, you get into a PhD because you want to become a professor.
That's what you're going to do.
And right, and in retrospect, that was an extremely naive assumption for me to make. But that's how I basically, you know, so when I was training for my PhD, I was training to ultimately, so I knew I had to do a postdoc, that's how it goes. But after a postdoc, I would end up with a faculty position. But looking back, I would never tell my students that, at least. Or I don't tell them that. Maybe things have changed, and plus even at that point in time, you know, I mean, I was a graduate student when the funding was better and everything. But even then, I don't think the success rate of a PhD going into a faculty position is more than 30-40%. So yeah, I mean, my supervisors planted that in me, and but yeah.
Did that continue in your postdoc too, like past your PhD? Were they very encouraging?
Oh, my mentors, so all three of them, my PhD mentors, I had two, right, Christopher Lima and Stuart Schumann, And then my postdoctoral mentor is obviously my hero. He is a Tom Check, who is probably, in my unbiased opinion, the greatest, at least biochemist alive, right? And he is, again, I just went to Pittsburgh, like I was saying, where one of my other friends, we both worked in his lab, and anybody who's worked with him is yet to encounter someone who is not just such a great scientist, but also such a selfless mentor. There are 35 plus people from his lab who are, meaning either did their PhD or their postdoc with him, who are faculty members. So he is so generous with them, taking their projects with them. He let me take everything that I worked on in his lab. And so absolutely, I mean, again, in terms of, what is the most important thing in terms of, you've got a good PhD, a good postdoc, you have independent funding, you have papers. I think the most important point then is your mentor. You need a supporting mentor, because once a mentor, always a mentor. So I'm going up for tenure soon, and they will be still writing. My PhD mentors will still be writing letters for me. So mentors are absolutely essential, and so pick them judiciously.
Wisely.
Yes.
Awesome. So how, now that you're a faculty member, what's your typical work week like, and how is that different than when you were like a postdoc or a graduate student? Like, are you in the lab still, or not much?
Right. I think even as a faculty member it has changed. So I'm in my 5th year now. The first 3 years were absolutely crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not crazy in terms of, not to scare everyone out, but not crazy in terms of bench work, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I just wish I did more bench work. Bench work I probably did the most in my PhD, okay? And then a little less in my postdoc, and very less now, right? But it's just in terms of the hours I'm either actually doing work related to research, grant writing, teaching, talking to students, designing projects, or meetings, right? It is at least, the first 3 years I would say 12 to 15 hours of the day. So, so obviously if you talk about balance, right, with life, my life obviously suffered, I would think, in the first 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
However, once the grant situation got better, we had papers coming out from the lab, the research program kind of got established. I think now I have, a better balance, but I still work in the evenings,
Mm-hmm.
and I still work on the weekends, but I kind of keep the kind of work which is not brain intensive, you know what I mean? If I'm writing reports, replying to not so important, not so critical, everything is important, emails. And so I do that in the evenings, and again, you'll get different answers from different people. Many people, and probably that's the right way to do it, leave work at work and then, spend time with family. For me, my typical evening is I'm in the living room with my wife and child, and then I'm kind of playing with her, but then whenever she is focused on what she's doing, I would try and get some stuff done on my computer, which is not so super critical. So it's not ideal, but at least it's better than me sitting in my office and not having her on her own.
Right.
But it's a lot better now than the first 2 or 3 years. Again, this might be different. Everybody's story is different, right? For me, the first 3 years were the most difficult.
And you also teach some undergraduate courses,
Yeah.
right? How do you find balancing that with also like lab and grants and everything else?
That's a great point. So the balance, so this again in general for the crowd here, right? I was very naive about this, again, for those who are already postdocs, right, and want to become faculty members. It's very different between being a faculty member in the medical school, most medical schools, ours is a little different, and in a college like I am in, the literature, science and arts. Because in the literature, science and arts, literally my 75% of my salary comes from teaching, right? And although my workload, I work mostly on my research, but the emphasis on teaching is more. So you have to at least enjoy, you don't have to love it. I actually do love teaching, but you have to at least enjoy teaching if you become a professor, in a department like mine. And so the reality is, when I'm teaching, I really love what I'm doing. When I'm doing research, I'm really happy with what I'm doing, except the reality is that because I spend so much time teaching, my research does suffer because of that. I clearly see the progress in my lab is much slower for the months that I teach, because I'm not able to have the to and fro conversation, keep troubleshooting in an active fashion,
Right.
at every step rather than wait for a full month before troubleshooting some experiment. So, I mean, that is a balance. Yeah, I have not been able to strike, I would say, and I don't know if I can, because when I'm teaching, I teach it. So this semester I just finished teaching a biochemistry class that is 353 students large, right? And so even if you spend very few hours doing that, you're still in those hours you cannot do any research. So
Right.
it's a compromise more than a balance.
Well, does anyone have any questions that they wanted to ask too?
Yes.
How would the teaching load be different if you were hired as faculty in medical school versus an LSA, which is primarily...
Right, so I can't actually tell you what it is in the medical school because I'm not in the medical school, but I can tell you what it is, what ours is, and then what theirs might be. Right, so for us, again, it depends on the department. The actual teaching load, okay, if you had no research, is supposed to be 4 courses a year, right? And so think about spring, summer, fall, winter. And so for us, because we are research and teaching faculty, again, this can change from, so Ohio State, not to use that as an example, might have a slightly different formula, right? And so if you have research, then like I said, 75% you're still expected, your salary comes from teaching. In our department, again, it's different between biology and chemistry. I'm in biology. I teach 2 courses a year, but it's not 2 full courses. So this biochemistry, this big, large, humongous class, right? I teach half that course, and then another instructor teaches the other half. But I teach it every year in the winter semester. And then in fall, I teach a specialty course, but I only teach it every other year. So in effect, I'm kind of teaching 1 full course every year. In chemistry, you end up teaching 2 full courses every year. And so it is pretty heavy. Again, the only part I get free is my summer, the 4 months, so spring, summer basically. So January to April I'm teaching, September to December I'm teaching, and then the chunk in the middle I never have to teach. That is in ours, right? In the medical school, I think probably they are in a transition because, so in the medical school you understand how the concept is, right? Most of your salary comes from your grants, right? The medical school will support, again, depending on the medical school, on the department in the medical school, how rich it is, how good you are, they would fund a percentage, maybe 20, 30, 40, it depends, right, of your salary. But you're expected to bring everything else from your own grants, right? And so then they can't expect you to also teach them, right? So then what you do more is you stress more on getting that second R01 grant or big grant that will now fund your salary and maybe let you recruit more people, right? However, since the funding is shrinking, the medical school is also stressing more on, so the medical school does teach many courses. So the biochemistry course I teach is not the only biochemistry course. There's an equivalent biochemistry course taught by the biological chemistry department in the medical school, right? So they have teaching loads, and so now they're slowly shifting to a model where they are, I think, giving some salary credit for teaching. So the teaching is increasing even in the medical school scenario, but I don't know exactly what the numbers are for our medical school. Yes.
I was wondering, as an international, well, when you first started, before, let's say, you became permanent resident, how did that affect getting extramural funding? Because I know a lot of things are geared towards permanent residents and citizens. So
Yeah.
when you're an international, when you're someone from another country, you're kind of restricted in what you can apply for.
And that's true, and there is no work around that. I mean,
So,
and so basically in your PhD, right, in my PhD, so my program actually, that was a new program, and they got some kind of an endowment from New York, and I don't know from where that money came. There were people in New York that put in money into this program. We never asked from where. And so our scholarship, because we were a small class also, right, so our scholarships were covered irrespective of whether we were international or domestic for the first 3 years. And then after that my professors, took up the bill basically. But there are, again, I don't know if of late there are more opportunities. There are very few opportunities as PhD students, international PhD students, to get external funding. For postdoctoral research, there are a few grants, private foundations, right? Helen Hay Whitney, Damon Runyon, Life Science, and then Life Science Research, and then it's one more, I think Jane Coffins, right? But they are right? And so you have to be again, you will never be discriminated against for being international in those, but you're competing against the best in the country, right? As opposed to, you know, an NIH, for example, or an NSF graduate fellowship, where, not to say that it's not a big deal, getting a perfect score, which is what I think you got, okay, is rare. Okay? But in general, the success rate is higher on those grants than any of these 4 posts. So the options are less if you're international.
But the K99,
Oh, yes.
you can apply for even though you're on a visa. That's one of the very few
Yes.
NIH awards that doesn't discriminate against your permanent residency or visa status. So you can apply on an H1, I don't know about a J1, for the K99.
So the K99, you all know what the K99 is. It's this transition grant where it funds the last 2 years of your postdoctoral salary and then gives you sufficient grants to then, for 3 years of your independent position. And so it's not, I would say it's like 75% of an R01 for 3 years. So it's quite a bit of money.
So did you apply for your own funding during your postdoctoral work?
Own funding in terms of, for my postdoctoral research?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got the Helen Hay Whitney Foundation postdoctoral fellowship. But again, that's after I didn't get 2 of the others. So it's, you know, there are 4. I was not eligible for applying for one of them because there was already a fellow. Tom Check's lab is a big lab, right? So there was already a fellow in that fellowship, so I can't apply for that. So I had 3. And then I went up against the same person who actually invited me to Pittsburgh, my lab mate. She got the other one. And so then I had 2. I didn't get one. And the last one I applied for, I got through. So it's a very, and again, even if I didn't get through, it doesn't mean anything. It's just at that level, I don't even know how they make, you know, the decision on who gets the fellowship. It's more factors than just merit. Yes.
So you said that Tom Check was so good about like letting you take your whole
Yes.
project with you, but starting as a new PI,
Yeah.
I imagine that's a harder thing to like.
Right.
Are you trying to model that the same for your own postdocs
So-
now, and then how do you do that with like a smaller?
So I should, I mean, when I started the lab, I did think that I would model it based on how Tom runs his lab, except I'm told when he started his lab, he didn't run it that way. The thing is, so far, I mean, I've had one postdoc who was really good and he wanted to be in academia, but at some point his just whole thinking switched and he actually is now doing very well in it, but in industry. So I haven't encountered that, but already he had applied, for example, to some faculty positions in India. And there he basically didn't want to work on the things that he was in my lab, and so he proposed to do different, he was interested in I think ribosomal DNA repeats and all that, and so that didn't overlap with what we were doing in the lab, and so I was fine. Yeah, I haven't encountered a situation where a postdoc would want to take the project, and I agree it's tricky as a new PI, right, because you're trying to establish your program, and then if half your program now goes to another lab.
So, I heard you say 6 years in your postdoc, which like makes my heart skip.
Oh, that's short. That's because Tom told me nobody has stayed more than 6 years, and so I had to leave in 6 years. But many other labs, it's more. It could be less.
So you intended to stay there for at least 6 years?
Oh no. I didn't intend to stay there. I think so because I had this conception that I am going to become a faculty, right, a PI. Right, and so if you want to, the reality is again, nobody asked questions about that, but I could say that, you know, in my time when I applied, it was basically you have to have big papers, right, at least one big paper, and by big paper you all know, like Cell Nature Science or something like that. You have to be either from a very, you know, big lab or some rising stars lab. Could be a young PI, but you know, clearly a rising star, right? And you have to have some kind of postdoctoral fellowship or a K99 or something like that that says you can bring in your own funding, right? And so, what was your question again? I think I lost track.
So ultimately, I was just wondering if you had started the process of applying for faculty positions and like had gone through multiple rounds, or was it on your first try you got this position?
Oh, for faculty positions. So basically, I applied. Right. Again, there are different approaches. One approach is if you really know what you want to do, what department you want to target. That's how my thesis supervisor told me to approach it, but I didn't. Like, he applied to 5 places. He wanted to be in New York, and so he applied to Columbia and Cornell and Sloan, NYU and Einstein, and he got through 3 of these, right? But I didn't do that because I didn't think, I think the thing was what it takes to succeed, or basically, right? And so for me, I applied knowing what my CV looked like. So the reason, I think you asked why it took 6 years. So the reason it took, now I remember, it took 6 years is because I had to build up a CV, right? The big papers and everything, to actually then apply and be competitive. And till the end of my 4th year, I had 2 papers, and one of them was in PNAS, right, which is a good journal. But clearly, Tom and I both knew, Tom is my mentor, right, that's not enough for me to get a faculty position. And so then I worked the extra 2 years to get that big paper out, and then I thought I was ready. And then in terms of how many places I applied to, again, the approach is different. I took the approach where, you know what, I really don't know where I fit. And I think that is the better approach now that I'm on the other side of the faculty search. Okay, because it is weird how departments or programs do their searches and are not always looking for the best candidate, but rather the candidate who fills a void, or or is the best fit for that department, would collaborate with more people there, and things like, or would in our department satisfy, oh, we don't have a person to teach microbiology, so they'll start looking for that, right? And that's impossible to guess by just looking at this blanket advertisement saying we are looking for, there is a tenure track position in this department and we're looking for the best candidate, right? And so I applied, I think, 50 places. I interviewed 10 places. I got the first offer from Michigan, and then I actually had not a written offer, but kind of encouraging news from UPenn. But then their process was taking too long, and so I just accepted the one offer that was already in it. So that's how it turned out. But I only tried once. I only went on the market when I thought I was prepared. Yes?
So I'm wondering, what is your attitude towards non-tenure tracks? Or you were targeting only tenure tracks?
In my applications, I did only target tenure track. But again, you have to assess your ambitions and your CV, right? And then make the best call. I remember, like, one of my friends, she just underestimated how good she was, and she said, and she was from Tom's lab too, okay, and so she applied, and so it's the same person I fit. And so she thought, what if I don't get, like, she obviously, if you've done 5 years of PhD and 6 years of postdoc like she did, you love science, you want to be in science, right? And so she wants to be a research professor, but she's like, what if I don't get one, right? So she applied not only for, tenure track positions, but also teaching positions. Not 100% teaching, but teaching heavy positions, right? Like in smaller colleges, like in DuPont was one place where she applied. And so she did that, but then what happened is her CV was just too good for that, right? And so she got an interview, she goes there, and they make her the offer during her interview and tell her to decide in 24 hours. So because they know there's no way we are keeping this candidate otherwise, right? And so then she comes back and she's nervous, what do I do? And then Tom just said, at least you did your evaluation and you're too good for this position, right? So you will definitely get something, not better, but something closer to what you actually want, because she didn't want to be just a teacher, right? It was more like a fallback option for her. And so in the end, she applied, she actually went into a program that she wanted to go into. So yeah, it's basically what you like to do. If you like teaching, for example,
so
right?
I'm not talking only about teaching, but there are
right.
positions that are non-tenure, right?
I think that is becoming more the norm, right? And so I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I'm told now that I don't have tenure yet, right? But I'm told that even if you get tenure, nothing much changes. So yeah, Ursula puts it a nice way actually. She says the only time it makes a difference is if you don't make tenure. Meaning if you get tenure, it's still the same worries. You still have to, get funding. You still have to teach, probably more. You have to do more service because now you're tenure. You don't have an excuse, right? And so I think even for tenured professors, the pressure is almost the same to keep bringing the money in, right? And so in that term, in those terms, if you're non-tenured or tenured, it's the same. And believe it or not, there are many institutes in the US where there is actually no tenure. It's just a contract-based system. Sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes it's annual. And they track your progress. They probably give you a grace period. Okay, 5 years gone, we don't have a new grant. We'll give you 1 year, we'll half fund your lab, we'll half fund your salary. 2 years and then they shut it in. You know, there is no tenure, right? And so I think, yeah, that probably become more the norm as we move forward. Yes?
So in like the medical school, since it's so much soft money, what happens if you get tenure and then you don't get grants?
I mean, that happens a lot everywhere. I'm sure it happens here also. I mean, again, different departments. So they have something called bridge funding, right? And that depends again on how supportive, rich, etc. your department is, right? So what, again, just like I said, they would probably say, okay, we'll give you, work really hard, we'll give you 1 year, we'll fully fund your lab, you just get your next grant. And then if 1 year goes and you don't have that, that will reduce to 6 months. And worst case scenario, you'll probably only have, if you're tenured, you'll have an office, and that's about it. They can, in principle, and they can even give you a small office if they want to put someone more important in your big office.
So you mentioned that the first 3 years as an assistant professor were really busy. I was wondering, was this because there was also a lot of new administrative roles
So this is,
that you were not doing in your postdoc, and maybe you were not trained at all in dealing with in serving in committees, writing grants, and all the things that.
absolutely bang on. So basically the 3 things I can think of are that were challenging, right, is grant writing. Everybody says how difficult it is, right? But I still thought I was, because I got this K99, I thought, you know what, I figured out the NIH, right? Because I write this, first attempt doesn't get funded, second attempt gets funded, I know how to write my own grant. And the RO one was an eye-opening experience for me. Okay, I am definitely not a gifted grant writer. I'm someone who can learn and hopefully have learned, right? But I was not born to write grants for sure, right? And so that takes more time than you would ever imagine, okay? The other thing that is very frustrating is, in my postdoc, I remember I fractured my hand, not to brag too much, okay, and then I still set the record for the largest number of mini preps or something, like 100 or something with one hand. And so, when I started my lab, that was my challenge to my students, you have to double that because you have 2 hands to work with, right? To break my record, right? When I started my lab, I thought I have the time to do these experiments. It was impossible for me to both do experiments and work on my grants. I had to either just spend time on the bench, and I felt extremely guilty because I should be bringing in grant money. And if I'm writing grants, I cannot just go back and just attend to something on the bench. So that was very frustrating, right? And so that makes both the processes kind of inefficient. And the third thing is, again, this I was not, and we're not trained for any of this, right? As a postdoctoral student, grant writing a little bit maybe, but with all these other things, and then balancing writing and experiments we are not trained with. And third thing is recruiting people, and that I have still not figured out, okay? And that maybe comes with more experience, which is, if you look at somebody's CV and you interview them, can you predict how successful they'll be? And so now I've been 5 years in the business, right? Almost. I have recruited people and then they have turned out to be good, but it's not in a trajectory that I would have predicted. And so that, I think, is another challenge. When you have students, how do you know, or rotation students, how do you decide who is a good student, who should I pick, who is most likely to succeed? And the other thing that we never think about as postdocs is, in the postdoc, you are a postdoc in the lab, right? When you have a lab of your own, you have to make sure everyone in the lab gets along and it's a happy lab, right? And so Tom had this amazing ability to only recruit nice human beings. Forget about the science, okay? Almost never in his lab, and not that he was always, monitoring this, did we have any kind of uncomfortable situation or confrontation or anything, right? And so again, for me, that's very difficult to do from just CV. Obviously tells you nothing about the personality, but even telephone calls with, the person's PhD mentor doesn't give you a good feel, because people are very reluctant to give, either in writing or on the phone, negative remarks about anyone, right? And so or positives that I saw but others probably missed.
Any other questions?
I had one more question. So you said that now you're on the other side of faculty hiring. So I was wondering how important are papers that one publishes in their PhD training? Does it also now come into matter when people are recruiting postdocs for that?
Good question. I think it doesn't hurt, but people have a short memory, and so what they care most about is your latest big paper. Okay, because I can think of many instances where people have not been very prolific in their PhD, right? But they somehow, just found that magic formula in their postdoc, and they have one or two really big papers that make the splash.
So you get a second chance then? I mean, it's not...
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I don't think a PhD is a deal breaker, except this is again getting to the whole mentor-mentee relationship. Even if you're not best friends with your mentor, you definitely don't want to be on their backside, okay? Because we take letters very seriously, not only from postdoc mentors, but also PhD mentors, and you don't want your PhD mentor to say anything negative in the letter.
So speaking of mentors, when you decided on your postdoc mentor, how did you pick out a mentor? Because that seems really hard. Like in your PhD, you have the chance to rotate with them, and like they really get a sense of you, and you can get a sense of them. But when you just go interview and then have to decide,
I think it's easier. Again, it's easier to pick someone who's established, or at least apply to someone who's established, right? Because what I went for is, is this person, prolific, right? Has he or she published like good papers in the past few years? Meaning, are they very active, right? You want a very active lab for your postdoc. And so the answer was easy to find out, right? You just check their publications out. The other thing is, like I mentioned already, it's just a track record, which is very difficult for junior PIs like me. Why should a postdoc? Again, I was surprised when I got Kamlesh, who was this really good postdoc, I was saying, who is now in industry. When he applied to my lab, I was like, you're so good, why would you apply to my lab, right? Because I don't have a track record, right? And so I would advise, again, unless this is a rising star and will allow you to take, your project with yourself, it's always best to pick a lab from which others have gone on to become what you want to become, right? Whether it's industry, whether it's faculty positions, teaching positions, right? That would say that this PI is supportive of people. It's not that, I know I was having this conversation with another guy student yesterday. You will find many big labs, again, not to name the big institutions, okay, where you have 30, 40 postdocs, right? And you'll see Nature and Science papers from there. But then after 5 years, if you try to PubMed the first author, you won't see them anywhere, right? And so there are many labs like that use postdocs and students as almost consumables, right? Like you burn them out, they give you your big paper, but they don't go on to become. You don't want to pick a lab like that just because they published a big paper.
the others?
Were your, oh sorry, can somebody ask a question? I asked. Were your personal connections important in getting, I'm sure Tom actually gets like a bajillion applications per year, so how?
Can be. I mean, in my case, no. I mean, in my case, like I said, he is very good. He's done this for 40 years now, right? 37 years now, right? And so he's very good at going through the, but basically in his lab, the way it works is I think his lab manager, kind of the person who really got him the big prize. He started with him when he started the lab. So this person actually goes through all the application and then skims through and then gets like a set for him, for Tom to look at. But contacts, yes, I did not do. So I probably gave one talk in my entire, like talk to a general audience and at a meeting in my PhD, and I regret that, because you should try to do more of that, because you want to network. And especially if you give a good talk or present a good poster, you absolutely want to do that, because it's very easy to impress people when they actually are in front of you, rather than just looking at your paper, right? Because when they look at your paper, they might think, oh, maybe, this was just all the PI's idea and this was just a pair of hands doing the experiments. But when they actually see you present your data, I mean, those are the connections you directly make, right? Sure, you could have connections through your advisor. Your advisor might say, you know what, I talked to this person, he or she has a vacancy for a postdoc, maybe you should apply that. Those are also good. I mean, yes, personal connections, if you can make them, absolutely you should. They're very useful.
So do you have any specific mentors who you go back to still when you have big decisions to make? And then how do you kind of maintain those connections now that you've moved on?
So I think my go-to person is always Tom, for two reasons. One is because of how supportive he is in general, right? But the other is because I'm in his field, right? I'm not doing anything related to what my PhD mentors do, right? I completely switched fields in my postdoc. And so most of my questions, relate to, okay, what kind of people do you think, would be people who would write letters for me, or, questions like that. I would ask him because he knows the field very well and he knows what it takes to succeed in this field, right? And plus he's it's very easy to approach. But I do go back all the way back to my PhD mentors also when I have questions. And like I said, once a mentor, always a mentor. They're always ready to help me. So yeah, mentors are, I can't state enough how important mentors are. You should never, I don't actively seek to keep those connections, and I don't think they expect me to. It's purely on a very professional basis. When they need some kind of help or they have questions for me, they contact me, and it's the same way from my side. Of course, it's always nice if you can invite them over to give a talk, right? It's nice for them to give a talk in a different place. It's nice for you to kind of showcase, this is the lab I came from. But other than that, I don't think you have to put in that much effort to maintain the relationship. As long as you're cordial and you haven't, don't do anything that would negatively impact that relationship.
And what do you find most rewarding about your position now?
Actually, so I teach and I do research, right? And the rewards, both the rewards are extremely rewarding, but almost opposite in nature. And I like that because then it makes sure I'm always happy for some reason, right? And so the teaching is very predictable because, it's just like the students, right? The good students, right? You put in all the effort and at the end of the semester you see a good grade. For me, I put in all the effort and I see students who came in all naive now talk like biochemists, right? In 4 months. So that is a very periodic, predictable reward, right? That happens once or twice every year for me. The research is rewarding just for the opposite reason of because how unpredictable it is, and you think you're following this line of research and you do that for 2 years, nothing happens, but then some offshoot gives rise to, wow, we never even thought of this, right? And that's the thrill that you get from research that is most rewarding, I think, where you don't go to discover something, but then just out of all the rigor that comes out of your experiments, you find something and you're like, oh, wow, that surprises you. So I don't know, both aspects are very rewarding. Yeah, I like teaching and research, and so I find both of them very rewarding.
That's awesome. Well, now that we just have a few minutes left, is there last questions?
So you have talked a lot about what people should do in a postdoc or what they should aim in a postdoc. As a PhD student, what do you think is important for a PhD student to aim at during the PhD?
Oh, so what to do in your PhD?
I mean, like, apart from everyone wants to have good papers, as I'm saying, but overall, what should be a perspective of a PhD student from their PhD?
So I think the jump from undergraduate or a master's to PhD is much steeper than the jump from, in terms of the knowledge, expertise that you gain, right? Compared to the, postdoctoral experience is just adding on to what you already did in grad school, right? Although, like I said, the job market cares more about what you do in your postdoc, right? And so absolutely, you want to get the best training possible as you can in your PhD, right? That's the reason why you're doing it. You're not in it for the money, obviously, right? You're in it for the training and for your passion and love for the subject, right? And so put in as many hours. She's my graduate student, so you can now keep that in mind when I give the last bit of it. Put in as many hours as you can, yes, and try to absorb as much science as you can, because I think the most fun that I've had in my research career is in my PhD, because the only thing, literally the only thing I thought about and cared about and worked on was my PhD project. I didn't have to worry about, I mean, I had to pass the prelim exam, which you will, I'm sure, and all the others who haven't will. Right? That's a minor stumbling block. But it was my project, and I spent all this time thinking about it, working on it, getting results. And that doesn't happen in your postdoc, because you have to, it's not a permanent position, it's a transition period. And it definitely doesn't happen as a PhD either.
Any other last questions before we wrap up? All right. Well, do you have any parting advice or?
Oh, for the audience?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I'm that established enough to actually give you like that kind of advice. But I think, I don't know, I mean, most of us in this room are not in this profession, like I said, for the money, right? And so you have to find your passion, and I think the PhD is the time probably that you'll find your first. Again, the passion can be tinkered around and change with time, but you have to find that passion, because you will be spending a lot of time and effort, right? And so you might as well spend it on something you really like doing. And so even at the end of the day, your time, you're not a National Academy of Science member, or you didn't even publish one big paper, right? You at least know that all the time you spent at work, this is work, right? Is doing something that you actually are passionate about. So I don't know. So that would be my, it's to not treat it as a 9-to-5 job, because for our intellectual level and our abilities, there are much higher paying jobs, for 9-to-5, from 9 to 5. So you have to be in here for
Because you really love it.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. If no one else has any questions, I think we're about out of time.
Thank you.
So, thank you so
Oh, no
much.
problem.
It's nice to meet you.
Yes, congratulations.